Tonight, after a month of researching and pondering, I'm here to do the first installment, the first serious installment on Sir James George Frazer's The Golden Bough. And joining me is Jordan. Hey, Jordan. I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
There you are. So, it's late. It's been difficult trying to churn this out. I think the tempo and the mood for this is going to be kind of like a midnight ride. So I think we should,
I like that.
yeah, I think we should just kind of get into it, unless there's something you want to say here to get us going.
No, I think that's good.
All right. My initial plan for this presentation was to cover the first 105 pages of The Golden Bough. However, my ambition has been tamed by the demands of the text. Today, our focus will be the first 52 pages, or chapters 1 through 3.3, no occultic initiated symbolism intended, which includes The King of the Wood to Frazer's discussion of contagious magic. And here's what we are going to accomplish today generally. First, we will review some points of connection between The Golden Bough and Kubrick's films that we've yet to discuss. These are things that came up after that original introduction. Second, I will go deeper into the mythological figures associated with Diana's Grove and unpack the varieties of sympathetic magic Frazer explores in an attempt to gain clarity on the priest king bloody rite of secession. And lastly, I thought it would be fun to look at some references to magic in Kubrick's films, and perhaps we can meditate on their connections to the schema Frazer has provided us. How is that for an orienting framework, Jordan? Oh,
That was great. Thanks for letting us know what journey we're about to go on.
all right, let's do it.
Do you want to stay here or go to the next
Let's
slide?
go to slide 2. So we should have the scene from Eyes Wide Shut here on the screen. Okay. In the preface, which we covered in our introductory presentation, Frazer explains that the primary motivation of his text was to explain the succession to the priesthood of Diana at Aricia. However, the discussion kept expanding and evidence came pouring in that this is a prevalent practice in other cultures, such as the Khazar kings of southern Russia. In the footnotes, Frazer directs us to another work of his that demonstrates this, called The Killing of the Khazar Kings. Initially, I thought this was a juvenile work that predated The Golden Bough, but I realized that he wrote this after he had completed the 12-volume set, but before the abridged version. So I believe it came out in 1917. I was actually able to track down a copy of it on the Internet Archive. Given that it is in the public domain and no one has made this into an audiobook, I've begun recording it and will release it as soon as possible. Frazer concludes the preface with his claim that this bloody, widespread phenomenon of priest ascension is best substantiated in African practices. If you have viewed the introduction to our study on the Golden Bough, you caught that Kubrick thought the text to be of the utmost importance. In that presentation, I theorized that Eyes Wide Shut, with the portrayal of an elite sex cult, might be the best candidate of Kubrick's films to demonstrate the Golden Bough's influence. It just so happens, and this is probably coincidence, though you never really do know with Kubrick, that in the scene where Sandor Svavast dances with Alice, he makes a reference to Ovid's The Art of Love. an ancient text which records the killing of the king ritual at Diana's Grove. The quote from Eyes Wide Shut: Sandor, did you ever read the Latin poet Ovid on the art of love? Alice, didn't he wind up all by himself, crying his eyes out in some place with a very bad climate? Sandor, but he also had a good time first, a very good time. I should have practiced that. I could have gotten their cadences, that drunken
Oh,
cadence of uh, of Nicole.
we'll act it out next time.
Yeah,
Send me the script.
yeah. And here is the killing of the king ritual mentioned in Ovid's The Art of Love. You blink and you miss it, but it's there. The whole paragraph goes like this: Why enumerate the resorts of fair ones suited for your search? The sands would yield to my number. Why mention Baiae and the shores covered with sails, and the waters which send forth the smoke from the warm sulphur? Many a one carrying thence a wound in his breast has exclaimed, This water was not so wholesome as it was said to be. See, too, the temple and the grove of suburban Diana, and the realms acquired with the sword by hostile hand. Because she is a virgin, because she hates the darts of Cupid, she has given many a wound to the public and will give many still. So let's go to slide 3. Last time we discussed that Frazer got the title for his text from Book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid. Therein we learn that Aeneas was instructed by Deiphebe, the Sibyl of Cumae, in front of the temple of Apollo, to obtain a bough of gold to give to Proserpina, the queen of Pluto, king of the underworld. It just so happens that Kubrick chose Stourhead as one of the primary settings for Barry Lyndon. This will be important, so I'm going to include a little blurb here from Wiki. The lake at Stourhead is artificially created. Following a path around the lake is meant to evoke a journey similar to that of Aeneas's descent into the underworld. In addition to Greek mythology, the layout is evocative of the genius of the place, a concept expounded by Alexander Pope. Buildings and monuments are erected in remembrance of family and local history. Henry Hoare was a collector of art. One of his pieces was Claude Lorraine's Aeneas at Delos, which is thought to have inspired the pictorial design of the gardens. Passages telling of Aeneas's journey are quoted in the temples surrounding the lake. So if you were to go to the location where they filmed Barry Lyndon and you are familiar with our discussion of the Golden Bough, you would be able to sort of inhabit Turner's picture that inspired Sir James Frazer to call his book The Golden Bough. This is so deep. So we have the story that inspired the title of Frazer's Golden Bough also woven into Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. I had always contended that the backgrounds of that film are telling a deeper story, and I couldn't really prove it, but I think this really unlocks a lot of things. We have to ask if one, this was intentional or a synchronicity, and two, could it possibly mean in either scenario? I'm not going to try and answer that question today, but I want to stick with us on this journey. And I have to give credit to Julie M. Kearns, who displayed this research on her fantastic blog, Idolopus Press, specifically the entry Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon Shot by Shot Analysis, Part 5. Jordan, if you can go slide 4.
You got it.
I, you, you've yet to see Barry Lyndon, is that right?
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
We, we've got to do it. I encourage
I
everyone.
know.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel? I mean, we're coming at this from different places. How do you feel knowing that the Golden Bough is in some sense written into the background of Barry Lyndon?
Well, we've discussed it and went through that blog a few weeks ago. So I'm familiar with the concept. I don't I don't really have a sense of the story itself.
Mhm.
But I do feel like I have a sense of the vibes of the film and how it does seem like there's a lot more about the setting and it's there's multiple things going on, and I think your point that the background itself, the mini geography of the place in and of itself, is almost a whole additional story
Yeah.
layer to what's going on.
Yeah. And really that goes for any of Kubrick's films. The the settings are always telling you something. Um,
Mhm.
this one's a little bit different because so much of it is happening, outdoors. So usually, with the Overlook set, there are definitely stories being told with that setting as well, but it's more manufactured by Kubrick directly. This is something I have to wonder, like, did he choose this because of this? I don't know. And the idea that you go around to these different buildings and they've got inscriptions on them. I believe like the first one is like you have to be initiated to go along this walking tour into it. So it's just totally wild. So our listeners are going to be a little bit initiated now. So let's look at slide 4 here. This is just quick. I had the layout of Stourhead. This is what people ought to be more familiar with if they've seen Barry Lyndon. And it's it's like I think it pushes 3 hours long. It's absolutely beautiful. It's like living inside of a painting, so it gets very meta. When you it feels immersive. It's a
Mm.
brilliant story. It's not as it's the tempo of it isn't as rapid as, say, other Kubrick movies, but I think it's a great one. It's visually stunning and was a kind of the it was released in 1975, I believe, and is the kind of the result of Kubrick's unmade masterpiece, Napoleon. He ended up salvaging a
Right.
lot of what he was gonna do for Napoleon with, Barry Lyndon, and this comes after Clockwork Orange, if you're keeping track of where we are in the Kubrick filmography timeline. What I thought was interesting about, what I've always thought about I'm gonna get to it right here. So here we have, Stourhead and the Pantheon. You can see that
Mhm.
temple across from the bridge. It's diagonal from the Temple of Apollo. So behind them is the Temple of Apollo. So you have the I can't believe that it's like built into the set of this movie. And this is an image from the Barry Lyndon movie poster. And I always thought it was like very interesting that Kubrick chose Ryan O'Neal for this role, not because he
Mhm.
doesn't he's an excellent Redmond Barry, and he had been wildly popular in Love Story, but a somewhat lesser known movie, came out a few years before Barry Lyndon, this film called Paper Moon. It's this black and white, movie starring Ryan O'Neal and his daughter Tatum O'Neal, and he's a con man, and they kinda go town to town. It's a fantastic little film, but I find it very interesting that he, worked with an actor who had a film called Paper Moon.
Moon, yes.
Yeah. Alright. So let's go on to slide 5. Now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of Frazer's text. So, do we have the Turner painting up? There we go. A little bit of a collage.
Yeah, it delays a little bit for you.
That's okay. That's fine. In chapter 1, Frazer directs our attention to Turner's Golden Bough painting, laying out the rules of succession for the priesthood. One ascends by slaying the priest and retains the position until overtaken by one craftier. This is a very strange rule, which was perhaps non existent elsewhere in classical antiquity. Fraser hopes to discover that these motives operated widely, founding a variety of institutions. If so, then it may be possible to trace back the conditions that gave rise to the priesthood at Nimai. Fraser believes the Diana myth, along with others, were invented in order to explain the origin of the religious ritual. I composed this slide early in the composition of this presentation, and so I'm going to recycle some of these photographs, but I'll just talk about them a little bit here. If the one with Kubrick in the top right hand corner, this is from Kubrick. Did not give speeches very often. This is a very famous speech that he gave when he was the recipient of the D.W. Griffith Award. Um, I believe he was working on Eyes Wide Shut at the time, and he filmed this, and there's just so many little alchemical clues in there, and he makes reference to the Icarus myth, and there's a lot to be said about that, but the Icarus myth primarily comes from Ovid's Metamorphosis, and I just chose this image to show like how deep Kubrick was in the classics and is directing our attention to Ovid. We have that in Eyes Wide Shut. We have that
Mhm.
in this speech, and clearly it's going to be connecting back to the Golden Bough. We're going to learn about this minor goddess in Diana's Grove with the water jug here, Egeria and Hippolytus. One thing I thought was interesting, I learned in the process of putting this together, that Diana has an annual festival on August 13th. And I thought that was so interesting because I can't remember what I was going through, but I found that the ticker tape parade that they did in New York City for the Apollo astronauts after they came back was held on August 13th. And that struck me as relevant considering, that Diana is associated with the moon.
That's right.
So, I mean, that might just be some cosmic coincidence. Probably is cosmic coincidence, but
What are
yeah, what are
coincidences?
coincidences? All right, let's go to slide 6 and unpack some of these characters. So, more on Diana. Do you have our little chart up here? There you go. So, Diana, the Greek Artemis, she was the Roman goddess of the hunt and childbirth. As I said, she's associated with Artemis, which led to the belief that she was the goddess of the wood, specifically the oak. The Temple of Diana of the Wood is near the village of Nimai in Italy, guarded by the priest who killed the previous priest. Chaste virgins tended her holy fire that burned around the temple. And we're going to learn about this character, Verbius, who is her male partner. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Egeria. She was one of two lesser divinities that shared Diana's grove. She's a water
Mhm.
nymph at Nemai, and like Diana, she can ease childbirth. Thus, women sacrificed her and believed her waters to have healing properties. And she's sometimes considered to be another form of Diana. Verbius, is the Greek Hippolytus, is this other minor deity at Nemai. Legend says that the Roman equivalent of Greek hero Hippolytus, who learned venery from Chiron the centaur, spent his days hunting with the virgin Artemis, the Roman Diana. He was Diana's lover and was uninterested in other women. Aphrodite wanted Verbius, but he spurned her. Aphrodite persuaded his father to kill him, but Diana revived him and hid him at Nemai. I believe in that tradition, Theseus is his father, which gets us
Mhm.
into the whole maze, but I'm waiting to get deeper into that at some point. Frazer says the ban on horses in Nemai relates to Verbius being dragged behind horses and killed. He's considered to be the founder of the sacred grove and first king of Nemai, king of the wood. So this is where this whole thing is supposedly going to start with Hippolytus or Verbius. And he guarded the sacred tree, which he may not have only worshipped it as Diana, but embraced it as his wife. So this connects back to her being connected to the oak. So that's primarily what we get in the first chapter. Um, and I think I'm going to keep this chart going. It's inevitably going to grow as more characters get introduced into the story. But that, for the first 50 pages, these are the relevant ones. So maybe we should go to 7 unless Jordan wants to weigh in on something?
I would just emphasize the part in the Diana box where you talk about the priest who had killed the previous priest.
Mhm.
That's a really big concept at the beginning of the book, and it's not just a one-off.
Oh,
You
no.
sort of already talked about this, but this is how that priest lineage operates.
Yep.
So to become the next priest, you have to murder the prior priest.
Yep. Yep.
And that is a central ritual that Fraser is really obsessed with
Yep.
and tries to find through lines throughout different cultures that tie back to this specific ritual.
Mm. Yep, he's obsessed with it. That's how he got the golden bough. Yep.
Mhm.
So if we can go to 7.
And if anyone is jumping in and didn't watch the introduction, that might be helpful. And or going back to the original myth where the golden bough specifically comes from at the Lake of Diana and all of that would be really helpful context as we continue to go on.
Yep. Yep. I if you didn't pick up on it earlier, read book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid, and that will go a as deep as you can go on this. You tell you everything you need to know. And I'd like to make an audio recording of book 6 of the Aeneid, but, you know.
Well, maybe as soon as we finish Rudolph, we can
Right.
or yeah,
Right.
get to that one.
Yeah, she's talking about The Idea of the Holy by Rudolph Otto.
Yeah.
I have Khazar King books to produce. We'll see.
Yep.
All right, let's do slide 7. This is a cool slide. I thought this was interesting. I got this from a catalog of sculptures from the Sanctuary of Diana pamphlet that the University of Pennsylvania produced. These are some busts and some figurines that they discovered supposedly at the Sanctuary of Diana in Nimai in 1895. So adds an element of reality to all of this. Proof that it happened there. Um,
As much as anything.
or as much as anything. Right. That's I should not digress. Yeah. So let's see. Um, Fraser generally wants answers to the two following questions, and I think Jordan has set the stage for this quite well. First, why did Diana's priest, the King of the Wood, have to kill off his predecessor? Like, we're just not accepting that as a brute fact. Fraser's not okay with that. He's like, we're going to find out an answer to this, and it's only going to take me 12 volumes or whatever to figure this out. We're doing the if you haven't watched the first version, I'm doing the abridged version, so it's 1,000 pages for me. And the second question, why in advance did he have to pluck the golden bough? To begin to answer these questions, Fraser points out that we are all familiar with the union of priestly functions with royal authority. One can even examine the Central American ruins of Palenque and find that the kings were viewed as gods who were expected to keep the sun and rain in their due seasons and make the crops grow. In the minds of these savages, Fraser claims there was no distinction between the natural and the supernatural. Therefore, a man god can arise with unlimited power over nature. In what follows, Fraser intends to examine how the priest king ascends by proficiency in sympathetic magic. So now we're getting into we're going to be defining a lot of terms and figuring out how it all kind of goes together. Um, yeah, we can go to the next slide if you like.
Sure.
I So in the text, I'm a big fan. I always have been. I'm very much a visual learner. I remember when I did my PhD program, I was always trying to like come up with charts to understand Plotinus or Augustine or whatever else. And I remember like the other grad students I'd be in the seminar with be like, dude, just like put it into paragraphs. Why do you need to do all these drawings? And I'd be like, that's how I learn, bro. And I think people kind of made fun of me for it, but I feel like this is yeah, I feel like this is Frazer, uh, gave us a few charts here to understand the delineation of sympathetic magic into its two principles of homeopathic magic and contagious magic. Another way of talking about sympathetic magic is the law of sympathy, homeopathic magic, the law of
Mhm.
similarity, contagious magic, the law of contact. And then magic in general is divvied up into theoretical magic as a pseudoscience, practical magic as a pseudo art, and we're going to be talking about the differences between positive and negative magic or sorcery and taboo. I have gone and created what I believe are more robust charts and uh, better sort of glossaries, index glossaries that I think will be very helpful for people who are getting into this. But um, let's get that going. Let's get that going.
Yeah.
All right.
I think these things will make more sense to people as we get into
Yeah.
the examples.
Yep. So let's define some terminology here. If we go to slide 9, Jordan. All right. So sympathetic magic, law of sympathy. What is it? So I mentioned it. There are two types: homeopathic and contagious magic. And to quote Frazer, both assume that things act on each other as a distance through a secret sympathy, the impulse being transmitted from one to the other by means of what we may conceive as a kind of invisible ether, not unlike that which is postulated by modern science for a precisely similar purpose, namely to explain how things can physically affect each other through a space which appears to be empty. Catching some typos of mine in here, but I think you get the general idea. Um, we've got to understand what is the difference between homeopathic magic and contagious magic and how they believe this connection in the societies that practice magic functions. So in homeopathic magic, the magician infers that he can produce any effect he desires merely by imitating it. Okay. So it's imitation. And Fraser says the error here is assuming that things which resemble each other are the same. And homeopathic magic is typically mixed with contagious magic, which we're going to define in a second, but it can be practiced purely by itself. Contagious magic that operates on the law of contact. Fraser writes, he, the magician, infers that whatever he does to a material object will affect equally the person with whom the object was once in contact, whether it formed part of his body or not. So it's not just that it's not imitation. We've actually got something a that has been in contact with the individual, a part of his person or something that was his. But the error here is that it assumes that things which have once been in contact with each other are always in contact. And like I said, it's generally combined with homeopathic magic. Jordan, do you think thus far that these are cognizable distinctions?
I think so. And I would take a step back and talk about the distinction Fraser makes between magic, science, and religion. I don't know if we get into that later, but from his point of view, magic necessarily is something irrational. And once it becomes rational, it then leaves the category of magic and becomes science, which, you know, I have opinions about. But to
Yeah.
him, he's not like he brings in, oh yeah, there might be some parallels in science, but the difference is that the scientist understands the mechanism, the magician does not understand the mechanism. And this isn't my personal perspective. This is just what he says in the text.
Well, I do.
Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
I don't really talk about the distinctions between magic, religion, and science too much in this presentation, but I think there might be some nuance to add to that. I mean, it raises an interesting conversation. I don't mind having talking about it a little bit. He's like, well, what's the error here? Well, it's like magic would be science if it accurately described the way that describe the way reality works, but because it doesn't have the natural laws that underpin the practice, therefore it's magic, which raises a very interesting question because science is ever evolving,
Right.
right? So, um, what we consider to be
Getting it correct without knowing why to Fraser is insufficient for it to be science.
is getting it correct. Well,
So
mm,
basically, what I'm saying, the action, like if I drop this thing and it falls, but I think I don't know why. I could go back through the text
yeah,
and
no,
try to
I'm tempted. I yes and no. Yes, yes and no. I think this gets into an interesting question about how much theoretical knowledge does the practitioner of an art or a science have to have, uh, when they're performing it. I'm not sure how much it really depends on the subject. So, I guess what I'm trying the thing I don't wanna go too deep into it because I'm a little over my skis, and I think we'll have to bracket that for a future conversation since I wasn't prepared for
Mhm,
it today. But it does raise a very interesting question. If science is ever evolving and it has its own right of succession where it's like murdering off the previous paradigm, when the new paradigm supplants the old paradigm, does the old paradigm then become magic? We have a situation that's going on right now, this tension between Newtonian and quantum physics, where the quantum physics seemingly is kind of like magic, right? Especially when you have like things that are traveling at speeds faster than light. It's like you have bodies that seem to be in connection with one another, and what happens to one affects what's going to happen to the other. Yet there's no causal mechanism that we know of that will allow for that to happen. And in a way, it seems very magical. So,
mhm.
that could become the science. And then it's like, well, does that mean that Newtonian physics is magic because it had an erroneous understanding of the theoretical mechanisms of the universe? I don't know, but I I I guess what I'm saying is you caught me a little bit off guard and I can't say more.
Oh,
I
yeah,
I
sorry.
I could say
It
more.
starts to break down too. So some of the critiques of Frasier is that it's inappropriate to apply scientific thinking at all to magic, and we don't need to go too deeply into it. But I just wanted to kind of pinpoint from Frasier's perspective, there is sort of this evolution line of magic to religion to science,
Yeah, no, there's
and maybe that's it for today.
right. And I would say science and magic have more in common than religion and science on Fraser's view, but we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to
Mhm.
that. I Today we're just talking about sympathetic and contagious magic. Even we'll get to contagious magic, but like clearly contagious magic, the word contagion is connected to this, and contagion is clearly involved in our modern scientific worldview of like disease, right? So, and you think about the responses to our disease, and some of it seems very magical, but I'm not going to get into that. Not going to get into that. Um, let's talk. Let's stick with these definitions that he covers in the first three chapters. I guess we're on theoretical. Magic as a pseudoscience. And Fraser says this is regarded as a system of natural law that is as a statement of the rules which determine the sequence of events throughout the world. And the theoretical magician requires more philosophical mind to discern the spurious science behind the bastard art. So, yeah, this is going to be more for the theoretical practitioner, not the person who's just trying to get an end result always. And if we can go to slide 10, practical magic as a pseudo art is regarded as a set of precepts which human beings observe in order to compass their ends. Primitive magician knows only practical side of magic, not interested in abstract principles, Magic is always an art, not interested in the science.
Hmm.
So right now, it seems like magic is bad science. And bad science is when your theoretical principles do not match reality. That's but I'm gonna have to revisit this. Now we have these
Or you might not even have theoretical principles.
well, that would be you're a practitioner. You're not really if you don't really have the theoretical principles, you are, an artisan. You are practicing magic. You're not you're not really concerned with the theoretical.
Right.
Okay. And on the practical side, as this magic as a pseudo art is applied, you're going to have the positive and the negative, the positive being sorcery, the negative being taboo. And so, what's the difference between sorcery and taboo and the positive and the negative? For the positive, magic or sorcery says, do this in order that so and so may happen. The positive precepts are charms. The aim of positive magic or sorcery is to produce a desired event brought about in accordance with the laws of similarity and contact, right? So you're not refraining from doing a thing. You have tried and true precepts that you know if you do this, you're going to, if you do A, you're going to get B, right? You've got, Fraser thinks you've got this mistaken understanding of causality and sympathy and connection, but you've got, millennia of spell books or whatever telling you that if you do this, this will follow.
Hmm.
And then the negative magic or taboo, the negative precepts are taboos. Thus, taboo is so far a negative application of practical magic. Negative magic or taboo says, do not do this, less so, and so should happen. The aim of negative magic or taboo is to avoid an undesirable one, brought about in accordance with the laws of similarity and contact. And taboo is just as erroneous as sorcery because it's based on false association of ideas, says Frazer. Now, if we go to slide 11, I have combined the two charts of Fraser. I hope he would approve of this. He may be spinning in his grave. I hope I'm presenting him correctly. But I have merged this. And the left-hand side, I have highlighted in orange because that's what I'm going to be talking about, the different varieties of homeopathic magic that he lists in the Golden Bough in the section that we covered today. And then we'll go and look at the different varieties of contagious magic to drive this home. But you see here on the left-hand side, we have the homeopathic magic, contagious magic on the right-hand side. I split it into theoretical magic and practical magic, and then we're going to be specifically looking at sorcery, homeopathic sorcery, and homeopathic taboo right now. And then we'll address the right-handed side. What do you, how do you feel about this chart that I constructed, Jordan? I feel like I could have like done it the other way or like subsumed this stuff under the larger theoretical practical distinction, but when I think about it, it's like college majors or something like that. I am there You could be a theoretical homeopathic magician, but don't not know anything about contagious magic or something like that because it can be practiced on its own. It's like you can specialize in this, and that kind of made sense to me. But I went back and forth about this a lot.
I think it's just an editorial decision. A lot of the examples Fraser provides actually cross multiple categories. A lot of his examples of homeopathic also contain contagious magic. I think the things that are a little more mutually exclusive are the positive and the negative. Um, but yeah, I think this is a fair way to break it down
Yeah,
and understand it.
I like when I
But they're not mutually exclusive, is what I would say.
right, you know, yeah, yeah, and we're gonna see that here if we go to slide 12. We're gonna see how they get mixed together. Um, I like when I conceived of this project of going through the Golden Bough, I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna, like, talk about the things that are super interesting. I'm not gonna get lost in all the jargon and terminology and do this close reading. I'm just gonna have a chill conversation about the Golden." No, I'm doing exactly the opposite of that. I'm gonna pretty much be creating an entire course on this thing. So, yeah, that's why we're only doing the first 50 pages today. So, we're going to look
Mhm.
at the different varieties. I missed some, and there's lots. He just gives example after example, but these are the ones that I jotted down in my notes as I reread it. So, as far as homeopathic or imitative magic, the first one he talks about that struck me and seemed the most obvious, and people at home are probably already thinking about it, are like voodoo dolls. And I had this under the title of affecting images. And the dolls can be used in a malevolent sense and a benevolent sense. So, like,
Mhm.
you know, this is a type of positive magic, charm, or sorcery, even though it's being used for an air quotes evil end, such as destroying an image of one's enemy to destroy one's enemy. Right? That's typically what a voodoo doll is used for. But it's it it's accomplishing an end, and you're doing it. Versus, say, it was a taboo, and you saw like a voodoo doll and you ran away from it because you didn't want to
Mhm.
be involved in it. And like a benevolent use of something like this would be to he gives the example of how it might be used to help women give childbirth or procure children. So they would make some cultures would make wooden images of a child and place it in a woman's lap in order to make sure that she gave birth. So that's like the benevolent use of an image in order to
Mhm.
bring about an end. And closely related to that is like the simulation of childbirth. I thought this was really wild. And by the way, I don't have I've broken these all up into charms and taboo. I'll fill this out as time goes on, but I didn't necessarily include one for everything. So far, some of these I have taboos, and some of these I have charms. And as time goes on, I'll add stuff. But this is what I had. So like,
If anyone wants more, just read it. It is endless.
it really is.
We'd be here all night.
So,
Listed them all.
yeah, like, so another example he gives is simulation of childbirth, where like, you could people could women could adopt even like full grown men that they had no blood relation to by like acting out the birthing process. Like they could like climb between their legs and go under them. And like in that culture, it'd be like, okay, you're officially adopted now because they imitated the act of childbirth, and these individuals were recognized as blood relatives within their tribe. So I thought that was super interesting. And stop me, Jordan, if you recall other examples um, that fit these categories or ones that I perhaps didn't cover.
This one reminds me of, maybe you touch on it later, but if somebody was lost and returned, but people didn't know where they were, they presumed they were dead.
Mhm.
They were still treated as and thought of as being dead until they went through a birthing ritual again.
Sounds similar. Sounds
It
similar.
was, yeah.
So you could also use homeopathic magic, and this is probably the most obvious one for healing and the prevention of illness. Frazer cites this Hindu practice of giving jaundiced individuals the hair of a red bull in water to bring rosy hue and life back. Also, a benefit of this type of homeopathic magic is that the cure can be administered to the doctor and not the patient. For instance, a medicine man may try to imitate and therefore rectify the stomach convulsions of a patient. So the magic doesn't necessarily require the individual to take the doctor's medicine. The doctor can sort of transfer it or something like that from his own imitative practice of it. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hunting and fishing is another obvious example of the application of homeopathic magic. Tribes will have ceremonies where they dress up as the animal they wish to hunt and capture a whole bunch of. But maybe a taboo of this, he talks about how Eskimo boys are prohibited from playing cats in the cradle, so their hands don't get tangled in harpoon lines when they are grown hunting whales. What's so interesting about these practices of homeopathic magic is they don't seem to take into consideration time and distance. It's not really a factor. So if you're it's like if you're a little boy playing cats in the cradle, like age 7, and if your hand gets caught in the line when you're 37, well, it was clearly what you did 30 years ago that you didn't avoid that gave you bad luck on this hunting
Mhm.
expedition. So,
There were also examples that involved the hunters' wives and ideas that if they were not loyal, if they
mm,
cheated, or different things, that certain things would happen
yeah,
at the hunt.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember that. I may even make reference to it, but yeah, I think it was like if they interacted with other men or something like that, their husband would die in battle or on the hunt or something like that. So it was
Mhm. There were a lot of examples.
a taboo to stay away from men while they're off out there killing things. Okay, food consumption. So a homeopathic taboo would be something like prohibitions against eating something that may cause one to take on certain traits, like eating a hedgehog as a soldier and then curling up into a ball. The hedgehog was kind of considered by some tribes to be this cowardly animal because um, it curled up into a ball in the heat of battle. So you would stay away from that. You don't want to catch these characteristics by consuming this cowardly creature.
Mhm.
Crops, another obvious example of the application of homeopathic magic. A charm or sorcery would be causing the crops to grow and bear fruit. So, like in Europe, I guess this is in medieval times, leaping high was thought to make the crops grow. So, I'm going to jump high, and then the plants are going to jump high. There's this connection between myself and the crops. And a taboo would be the dispositions of people are also seen as affecting crops. So, a barren woman ought to abstain from certain agricultural practices. Um, the opposite is true as well and represents a form of sorcery. So, yeah, the idea that one's disposition could affect how big the crop was going to be. But then there's this idea too that the crops are going to affect us as individuals. And I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about that with Mandrake towards the end of
Mm.
this. Plant magic, as far as charms go for that, just as the character of a person can affect a crop, the qualities of plants can affect a person. Like I said, it works both ways. An instance of this were amongst the Cherokee, catgut plants are incredibly tough, and therefore the Cherokee would wash with it for strong hair and muscles. I thought that was interesting. It's like, well, and you kind of appreciate the logic. It's like, well, this thing is tough and you can't break it, and our plows hit it, and it totally prevents us from practicing good agriculture. Think about if there was this connection between it and your hair or it and your muscles, you'd be undefeated.
Well, maybe there is,
Maybe there is, you know,
related this
maybe
particular plant.
it I mean, there's lots of things out there where you're like, "Oh, if I consume this, then I will become this," but we don't typically think it's like, "Oh, there's gotta be a scientific reaction or a chemical pathway or something like that that's undergirding the whole thing." I'm trying to think, like, what an example of this would be, but, um, like eat you know, people, like, eat the livers or something like that of, like, oxen or something like that, and to have great physiques and to be super strong. Well, the reality is that there's, like, some neurochemical pathway that's going on there. It's not that there's this sympathetic, magic going on. Um, the influence of the dead was another one, with sorcery, since the dead are deaf, dumb, and blind, one can use bones to homeopathically induce deafness, dumbness, and blindness. I thought that was interesting. Stop me if you want to add anything here, Jordan.
Okay.
Uh, Animal influence via as far as sorcery goes, via homeopathic magic, one attempts to attain useful qualities from an animal. So you could, you know, wear like a bear's head, so you become ferocious like a bear or strong like a bear, right? Like you're going to take on the spirit of it. Um, and even inanimate objects. There's positive homeopathic magic with inanimate objects. Examples of this that can bestow weal or woe, like one is wearing a fertile woman's robe for the sake of conceiving. It's like, well, this woman's fertile and I've got her cloaked, which means uh, I'm going to be fruitful as well. Pos-
I think this would be an example where the contagious and the homeopathic are in play at the same time.
uh, Possibly. I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah. Like we talked about earlier, it's not. Um, they're frequently combined, especially like
Hmm.
especially like with the voodoo doll example earlier. A lot of the voodoo dolls like had we're going to get into contagious magic here in a second, but um like a lot of voodoo dolls like had the hair or something like that
Right.
of the person that they were imitating, so you have the synthesis. It's not so neat, like you're saying, it's not so
Hmm.
neat between homeopathic and contagious magic. uh, Possessing stones with magical virtues, even things like nature, like observing sunsets after wedding ceremonies in Indian culture, the Hindu culture, like that this would determine one's marriage or viability, um, and even like some sort of relationship between man and tides. Some in England associated the ebb tide with death. And then we had the annulling mimicry magic, and I think this is going to be a big one in our reality if one can kind of connect the dots. But it's believed that evil omens are offset by mock calamities. You fake things like a death in order to stop something
Mm.
bigger from happening.
Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
Say no more. Isn't it exciting to hear me just rattle these off, Jordan? I owe it to the
Well,
text.
yeah, there's so much, and this is even just a survey. I think what I've been tampering down is this is Frazer's perspective and his combination of examples.
Mhm.
And you can even see within them, he's injecting some hypotheses as to why these things are done.
Yeah.
I think I'm a lot more open to reality as we know it being not so black and white, not so straightforward. So some of these examples, I don't even find that ridiculous personally. But
Yeah,
what
I
do you
mean, I
think?
don't yeah, I mean, this might you might want to relate how in the introduction to this series, I talked about Wittgenstein's writings on, The Golden Bough. I think, Jordan, you got into it a little bit. I have not had time to dig into it outside of what I kinda knew where, Wittgenstein is notorious for protecting those things that we ought not to be doing violence to with our limited linguistic frameworks.
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, he kind of rejects the total premise of how this analysis is being done. Um, I think also having been a student of magical thinking, both through Gordon White's work, but getting really into theurgy and pre Platonists and Platonists and all the things that they did. A lot of people think that magic is real. and have throughout even Western lineages. So I would say like this is definitely a academic perspective, perhaps, and one that is more a big criticism of Frazer is the armchair
Mhm.
anthropologist who didn't really do the field work, was not there. He's getting a lot of this secondhand, which, it is what it is. We're doing this for many reasons. Like, this is a super influential work, and it's a huge catalog of pervasive archetypal symbols and stories. So I do think it's still very valuable. And um, yeah, it's just one perspective, but I don't know anywhere else where there's this many examples in one place of different magical practices, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's I don't really know what theurgy is, and I've not gone over the entirety of the Golden Bough since reading it for the first time a year and a half or 2 years ago. So you know,
Well, even just getting into simulation
yeah.
theory, if you want to play with that framework and lay it over a lot of this, I think that does kind of a similar flip in the mind
Yeah.
of possibilities.
Well, I guess if I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but I think I don't wanna say this, but I think theurgy is not sympathetic magic or contagious magic. It's something else.
Aspects of it
Okay.
definitely are sympathetic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright. Well, we'll have to
Yeah.
bracket that. I mean, unless you know off the top of your head. Could you define theurgy? Or
Um, I mean, broadly, it there's like two forms of it. One is really a purification process of the self. And then the other aspect of it, and these have specific names, I don't remember the names. The other aspect of it is the ability to essentially be a host for um, divinity. Different people would probably
mhm.
say it different ways. I'm not quoting
We're talking about
Iamblichus
channeling.
directly here. Sort of. That might be a fair um, way of saying it. I mean, this is a whole other
Yeah,
topic,
it is. It
but
is.
when you're talking about sympathetic magic, it's like, okay, um, what are things that I do to put myself in a state where I'm like able to operate in a certain way or receive a certain thing? Yeah.
I'm just gonna read the wiki definition here. Theurgy, also known as divine magic, is one of two major branches of the magical arts, the other being practical magic or thaumaturgy. Theurgy describes the ritual practices associated with the invocation or evocation of the presence of one or more deities, especially with the goal of achieving henosis, uniting with the divine and perfecting oneself.
Hmm.
So I can see why it would be Platonic, that henosis, the one. So,
Right. And today downstream of that, I feel like it's gone in a lot of different directions, but it's not a new idea.
all right. Well, that's
Yeah.
a whole other study. We got to get through this.
Yep.
I'm just talking about boring old sympathetic and contagious magic. All right. Let's go to slide 15.
Okay.
Okay. So, hopefully going through all of that has clarified what homeopathic magic is, what the practical magic, positive magic, and negative magic are of
Hmm.
homeopathic magic. So now we're going to look on the right side of this chart, contagious magic, the law of contact, its theoretical and practical aspects, and sorcery and negative taboos as they occur within practical magic of the contagious variety. So, if we can go to slide 16, body parts seems to be a theme in contagious magic, and such a sorcery charm might include, for example, coming into possession of someone's hair or nails. It lets you impose your will. Fraser also cites the Baganda, who believe that everyone is born with a double, which I guess, is the childbirth. And all sorts of rites and rituals are done to ensure the outcome of the individual. They're done upon this childbirth, this naturally occurring double.
Mhm.
I thought that was wild.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe a stretch, but it makes me think of Kubrick's obsession with doppelgangers.
Yes, and it's not just Kubrick's obsession with doppelgangers, it's he gets it from Freud, although Freud is
Yeah.
not going to be about magical thinking, but it is something to think about. Yes, for sure, for sure. Jordan's right to put Kubrick's work is replete with doubles. I mean, I think everybody thinks of the twins from The Shining, but an earlier work called The Day of the Fight features the Cartier twins. One's a boxer, one's the manager. That was an early film of his, short film, and there are a variety of others. I mean, they're not always identical twins, but there are all kinds of doppelgangers and Eyes Wide Shut. I could go on and on about this, but yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so then another type of contagious magic might involve the wound and the agent of the wound. So the charm or the sorcery involves the magical connection between the agent of the wound and the victim. Pliny relates that if one is sorrowful for causing suffering, one can spit on the hand that gave the wound, and the sufferer should feel relief. So that hand is still connected to the victim's body. And if you do certain things to that hand, then the victim, through the law of contagion, is going to feel better. Interesting. Same deal with man and weapon. A type of sorcery with that. Um, is a sympathetic connection is believed to exist between a man and the weapon that has wounded him. Frazer speculates that this is because the blood on the weapon continues to feel as if in the man's body. And this was probably my favorite one, impressions. I like this. This is probably my
Oh,
favorite of
yes.
all of them. Um, this type of sorcery, sympathetic magic can be practiced if a man's outline is made in sand or with his footprints. And he gives this example: the South slave girls would dig up lovers' footprints and place them in a flower pot with a fadeless marigold. So I found that to be pretty beautiful. Some of these are like really upsetting and disturbing, but that one's pretty beautiful and poetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that your outline in the sand or your footprints can be used to practice contagious magic. It's unreal. So
Mhm.
that this covers the part of the presentation that where we unpack all the terms and create these charts to kind of get our minds around things. The next part, and I'll let Jordan add anything here before we get into it. I just wanted to take a look at some episodes of magic in Kubrick's films.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Should we get into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we've seen this before.
So I've made a little collage here. In closing, I want to examine some references to magic in Kubrick's films, given that he believed the Golden Bough to be of great importance. So, the first one, the background of this slide is the magic show at little Brian's birthday in Barry Lyndon. There's a subtext here. Kubrick seemed to think there to be something very magical about birthdays, both within his films and outside of them. We can see that the magic performance is done in front of an astrological tapestry. And there's a whole thing here where he goes in this whole thing about the colors of the rainbow and a white rabbit and this blue ball.
Mhm.
We'll have to watch it, and I encourage everybody to go into it, but I think you'll probably start to see what I'm getting at here. Next, we can see Sergeant Hartman sing Christ Happy Birthday and then references a magic show and Chaplain Charlie. It is my belief that these magic shows are connected the one Barry Lyndon and the one in Full Metal Jacket, and communicate a great deal of information, which are presentations in and of themselves. At least on one level, the twin magic shows refer to Sir Isaac Newton's birthday and the unbelievable accomplishments of Newtonian mechanics. Can't possibly get into all of that, but this you've got look in so look into Charlie Chaplin, look into Sir Isaac Newton, find out their birthdays, find out what's going on with blue balls. Look into it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Super
Yeah,
simple.
super simple.
Mhm.
Here 3. Here we have Ripper disclosing his fluoridation conspiracy theory to Mandrake in Doctor Strangelove. It should be noted that mandrake root was a key component in many witch elixirs in medieval Europe. So perhaps there is a larger communication here than we understand. Like, what is water fluoridation?
Mhm.
4. Next, we have the magic circle game featured at the end of Eyes Wide Shut. I would not be surprised if this is connected to the zodiac tapestry that we see in Barry Lyndon. Magic circles were used by practitioners to form a sacred space or offer protection. This clearly inspires us to think differently about the intentions of the elite sex cult in Eyes Wide Shut.
Mhm.
5. In The Shining, we see Jack looming over the model labyrinth, clearly imploring us to apply the story of Theseus and the Minotaur to the film. One would suspect this would make Wendy Ariadne, who helps Theseus out of the maze with what are sometimes described as her magical threads. As I've alluded to here in this slide, there are magical threads throughout all of Kubrick's works. We can go to slide 18.
Is Kubrick doing magic?
If he is, what kind is he doing? I mean, here's the thing, he's clearly a movie magician. This is movie magic. What is movie magic? Like, what is it? Like, when you're picking up on all these different threads, when you're picking up on this alchemical symbolism, when you're able to understand, like, that that Aeneas's journey into the underworld is woven into Barry Lyndon, um, what is happening here? What is the outcome? Is this I didn't go through here and say, "Oh, this is sympathetic magic and this is contagious magic." I mean, I've got to think about that some more. But let's just say he is some sort of magic practitioner. Like, what is he trying to do? You know, is he trying? What's he trying to accomplish? Um,
Mhm.
is it malevolent or benevolent? It seems to
'Cause he's embedding it into storylines that don't necessarily inherently focus on magic.
no, but he's telling us they
Like
are
Doctor
magical.
Strangelove, right, Doctor Strangelove to an uninitiated audience is not about
No,
magic,
but it's all about magic.
but
It's
it is.
totally about magic. I mean,
Mhm.
think about it's Doctor Strangelove is about sex magic. Like
Mhm.
like there's all the, the refueling in air and the bombs and all this stuff. Like this is
It's ridiculous,
it's
honestly.
it's it's and
Once you see it.
well, what was interesting is that he didn't really respond to much fan mail, but after Strangelove came out, somebody wrote him. I'll have to look this up. Somebody wrote him and was like, "By the way, did you mean to include all this subliminal sex stuff in there?" And he's like, "You got it. Nobody else picked up on it." And years later, it's obvious, right? Like there's, all the talk about precious bodily fluids and all that stuff. But um, you got to think about like what is the atomic bomb and why did
Right.
he? People just think Strangelove, but the subtitle uh, how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. Like, how does that make any sense? How do you? How does anyone, especially after watching Strange Love, stop worrying about atomic annihilation? And I think it's
Mhm.
you can only I'm not gonna say it here, but I think
You probably already said
I've said too
too
much.
much.
But to the initiated, once you get initiated, you know to you just just enjoy the comedy. Just enjoy the dark comedy. So, that's all I'll say.
I'm gonna get you in trouble.
Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Okay. Um, so in slide 18, here we have Redmond Barry admiring Ludovico Carteyes, The Adoration of the Magi painting in Barry Lyndon. This is interesting, not only because the Magi etymologically have connections to magic, but may have been practitioners as well. Also, it establishes a magical thread, namely the artist Ludovico Cardi shares a name with the Ludovico technique used to brainwash little Alex in A Clockwork
Mm.
Orange. So we look at this in the span of like 2 slides, Jordan. Like we've got a magic show in Barry Lyndon, we've got a magic show in Full Metal Jacket. It like clearly he's connecting these films and clearly he's connecting Barry Lyndon to Clockwork Orange through this Ludovico painting. So
Mhm.
unless you think that this is coincidence, and I I don't. So to get back to the question, if Kubrick is a type of magician, if creating magical threads like to get Theseus out of the labyrinth, which I take it we are Theseus, it would seem to be that he is practicing a type of benevolent magic. Now, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure it falls underneath these categories of sympathetic and contagious magic that we've just talked about so far, or if it's even proper to call this a type of magic. Um,
Well, when you come into contact with film,
that's
I
interesting.
think contagion is in
There
play.
is a bit of a mind contagion here, isn't there? And this gets into the concept of the monolith, which many people think is a film screen stood upright, and that Kubrick's
Mhm.
films are um, teaching tools to accelerate consciousness. Perhaps you could argue that that this is a type of contagious magic. I could buy that. I have to think about it a little bit more, but I think that that resonates as true with me.
Mhm. And on the sympathetic front, this might be overly generous or reachy, but creating emotional states in a person sort of creates the sympathetic experience, right? Like you're experiencing these people's stories and um, highs and lows and the dramas, and
Yeah.
you you almost take on the signature of the very thing you're watching in that moment.
Right. I like this. I really like this idea of yours. Like, you know, I've argued elsewhere that certain characters in Kubrick's films are like avatars of him. Like, I think Redmond Barry, Ryan O'Neill's character, is an extension of Kubrick in a lot of ways. Specifically, the sense that he's an outsider who tries to make his way into high society, and Kubrick being um, a a Bronx Jew climbing up and getting his way into the elite of um, the theatrical arts, I think kind of mirrors that
Mhm.
in some ways, and the sense of never fully integrating, just like Redmond Barry never fully integrates into the upper crust. So, in a way, these avatars, as you're saying, they could be kinda like voodoo dolls. Like, you're like, not just for Kubrick, but for us, like, if we start to identify with them in some way, and if that's the case, then maybe some sort of sympathetic magic, maybe some sort of homeopathic or imitative magic could occur. That is fascinating. That is totally fascinating. Like, if you're really identifying if the movie is done correctly and you start to see Dave Bowman as an extension of yourself, then do you undergo the Gnostic alchemical process that allows for rebirth? Ooh,
Mhm.
that is a big idea.
And
That is a big,
it
big
mm.
idea.
They say, the how true this is, I don't know, and Clockwork Orange has a lot to do with this, but they say the brain doesn't do a great job of discerning between real experience versus experiences taken in via film or media, and so I think that lends itself to this idea that we could be victims at worst, participants in this magical ritual as the audience.
Ooh. Oh my, this is, like, blowing my mind. I really wish you would have told me about this in advance. I could have been prepared for it.
Mm,
I don't ah, that's a
gotta keep you on your
yeah,
toes.
yeah. Let's go to slide 19.
Mhm.
We got the Scat Man.
Oh, you love this photo.
I do. I love all these photos, but as referenced just 2 slides back, Kubrick has tied the concept of magic shows and birthdays together for us. Here we have a fascinating synchronicity. Kubrick told Scatman Carruthers, who plays Halloran in The Shining, that the film would be released on his birthday, May 23rd, 1980. In the photo on the right, Kubrick photographs Scatman behind the scenes playing the piano and smoking a gun pipe, as in a smoking gun. Scatman would die 6 years later on the 23rd anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, which many believe is alluded to in The Shining with the costuming of Barry Nelson as Stuart Allman slash JFK. Coincidences like these have fed into the belief that Kubrick is some kind of magician, and I think one with benevolent intentions, which ironically Scatman himself alludes to in a song he composed entitled Stanley Does It All. Scatman performed the song during a 1980 interview on Mick Gallus's Fantasy Film Festival. I screenshot a relevant lyric. Stanley, who looks ahead, can make you think he raised the dead. And yeah, I don't know. I this is just a glimpse into how many of these staggering coincidences really add up in Kubrick, and it's hard to dismiss at a certain point, but
Mm.
what is really going on here? And was Scatman kind of read in? Did he understand that Kubrick had this power? And this kind of it gets into the idea of, and perhaps we can use it to explore our previous conversation about film as magic and these actors being like voodoo dolls or whatever. Um, I don't know if you've gone deep into it, like what is mimetic magic or like meme magic, or,
Mm,
you know, did Kubrick know by bringing attention to this image of Scatman smoking a smoking gun that somehow he was going to like manipulate his fate in some way to tie it back into another scene from the movie? Like, did he know that that was a possibility? I'm not trying to make any sort of allegations here. It could have been totally unintentional. Like, how does this work when we have images and we pose them in such a way? Like, does it start to reveal our destiny?
hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not trying to say that there was anything uh, malevolent here, but maybe that's kind of how it works. Like, there's just so many things where we start to fulfill the destiny of the role that we play on the world stage.
Right. A lot of this goes into theories of how to best be an actor.
Mhm.
I'm not familiar enough with the literature. I'd have to ask Ryan actually what he would cite, but there is an increasing focus on the somatic experience. So, really being in one's body and completely embodying that character or that energy and allowing that to be expressed through the body, um, intentionally or not, that could totally impact your life trajectory.
This cracked open so much. Should I move on to the final slide?
Sure.
All right. Moving away from Kubrick. Speaking of JFK, malign conspiracy theorists such as John Shelby Downard have claimed that the killing of the king ritual persists within our culture today and cite this as the true motive for the Kennedy assassination. Aside from a passing allusion to it by Downard, I've yet to see strong evidence affirming this claim. There are, however, some interesting elements that correlate between the mythical origins of the ritual and Kennedy. For instance, one, Kennedy pledged to put us on the moon, and the goddess of the sacred grove was Diana, a figure connected to the
Hmm.
moon. Two, one of the first Apollo astronauts was named Virgil Gus Grissom, which therefore he shares a name with the poet Virgil, who preserves the story of the Golden Bough for us. And three, Kennedy is remembered with an eternal flame, and the Vestal Virgins in the sacred grove tended a sacred fire. I'm more inclined to believe that these are uncoordinated coincidences from the perspective of men. I don't see it all there yet to say that this ritual is happening. However, there does seem to be a recycling of mythological figures and narratives as if they are loading programs for our simulated environment.
Hmm.
It's I I'm tempted to think that I mean this is essentially kind of like the archetypal theory of Jung playing out in history. I don't believe there's a conspiracy here. I don't see that yet. I see instantiations of forms. So,
We also have the flame in France,
yep,
an eternal flame dedicated to Princess Diana.
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. It goes deep. And I believe the from what the research I was doing on this eternal flame, was a last second request of Jackie's. Apparently, she wanted to, um, imitate the one for the unknown soldier that I believe they have, for World War One unknown soldiers, and so it was kinda added at the last minute. It was not part of the I think I think they even had to light, like a tiki torch at first before they had this more permanent
Yeah.
thing installed. So, in closing, I want to thank all of you who joined me on this journey today. In the next installment, we will begin with chapter 3.4, The Magician's Progress. So, how'd you like that, Jordan? Me throwing the spiciest stuff in at the very end, not thinking
Oh,
anyone
yeah.
would watch it all the way through.
Oh, I see. That's the tactic. Yeah, when we discussed prepping for
Yeah.
this, you were like, I think I'm going to stay away from all of that.
It's weird, right? Like, I don't want to endorse it, but I feel wrong not talking about it. So,
Yeah. Well, and everyone can do their own research,
yep.
feel what's true to them or valid or not valid hypotheses. I'm sure there's other dots that we have not connected or just simply didn't have the time to connect here. Would love to hear everyone else's thoughts in the comments.
Right on. Well, thanks, guys. I'm done. Do you want to close it out, Jordan? Anything else?
I think I'm good. I think we covered enough ground for today.
All right. Thank you, Jordan.